Welcome, everybody. Good evening. If you're here for the workshop DEI in Higher Education, which is hosted by Project UpGrad, the Title V grant. My name is Luis Molina. I'm a director for that grant, and we invited Cecil Chick today, who is our Assistant Vice President of Diversity, Inclusion, and Equity. Cecil is a Titan alum. I graduated from the EDD program. So instead of me going on and on, I'm gonna let Cecil take it away. She's gonna give you some background. She's gonna talk about diversity, equity, and inclusion in higher education, and she's gonna talk a little bit about her trajectory, career trajectory that led her to us here during her role and her current role. That's what I'm trying to say. All right, so thank you all for being here. You all have a good workshop. Cecil, thank you so much. We really appreciate your time and appreciate you doing this for us. We appreciate you very much. Thank you, Cecil.
No worries. Thank you for having me. Thank you. All right. Thank you, Luis. Hello, everyone. Happy Wednesday. Is it Wednesday? Tuesday? It's Tuesday. It's Wednesday? I don't know, right? You had to think about it too. It's Tuesday. Wow, I really thought it was Wednesday. I'm totally not living life right. So I am Cecil Chick. I use she and they pronouns. I serve as the Assistant Vice President to Diversity, Inclusion, Equity at Cal State Fullerton. So I was a high school math teacher for 4 years. I taught middle school and high school math. And I did it in the state of Florida, and it was kind of rough, I'll be honest. I did not enjoy it. So upon being a teacher, a math teacher, I realized what I really wanted to do was help students. And I love education, but like nobody really wanted, like the quadratic formula is not everybody's jam, right? And it was hard to holistically help students when I was in a system that like test students and everything was based off of how well they can test and score, right? In a like end of the year exam or Common Core standards and all this other stuff. So I wanted to, remember I said holistically help people. And so what I did was I entered a master's of counseling program. So I did it at the University of Central Florida. That's my alma mater. It's where I'm like from. And in that program, it was really like intensive therapy for me for like 3 years. But I got the skills that I needed really to like work with people and got really good at peopling because I picked up being a counselor, right? Like I know how to talk to people. I know how to read in between the lines and understand nonverbal communication in a way that kind of led me to do DEI work. So while I was getting my master's, I was also a graduate assistant at the Career Resource Center on campus at my alma mater. So that's kind of where my DEI work started. I was a cultural identity, like space coordinator, right? Like I did that work. I was a graduate assistant. We did programming, we did education. I work with students. So I did student development, identity development. There were so many different things that kind of popped up, and I did that for a couple of years. And then simultaneously, I worked in a nonprofit organization that served LGBT homeless youth because it was my internship for my counseling program. So that's where I did my internship hours and things like that. And upon graduating, I kind of had this moment, like, do I want to go become a full-time counselor, like mental health? Like, is that the career trajectory I want to take? But when I was interning at that nonprofit, it was really emotionally taxing. Like I worked with a lot of LGBT, like homeless youth. And we're talking about like youth that were dropped off at our center because we had housing, because their parents didn't want them because they're LGBT, right? To like mental health, like severe and pervasive like mental health disorders. And it was just heavy all the time, all day, every day, right? And so I told myself, like, you know what? I'm going to spend 6 months looking for a job in higher ed. If I don't land one in 6 months, then I'll go be a counselor. Right. And so my point of entry into higher education was in housing, which is what most people's point of entry is. So I served as a residential life coordinator in a small private liberal arts college in Florida. There are a total of like 3,200 students. Like that's the whole campus, like 3,200 students top. And it was fun. It was nice. But the beauty about working in a small private college is that you are everything to everyone all the time. So I was the conduct person. I was the maintenance, like dispatch person. I was on call. I was the DEI person, I was the training person, like all of those things were rolled into one. And because I got a chance to wear so many hats, the campus actually promoted me to their director of Office of Diversity and Inclusion because I was doing so much work with that office when I was working in housing, and they lost their director and they needed somebody to fill in that position in the interim. So they gave me the opportunity to step into that role. So I went from being like a residence life coordinator, like just finishing my master not too long ago. And then within like a year and 3 months, I was a director of a whole office overseeing full-time staff. It was a multicultural center, a cross-cultural center. I worked with our multicultural student council. We did programming, we did development, we did first gen, like peer mentor programs, like all that fun stuff. And then my wife and I decided to move to California. And that's when I started working at Cal State Fullerton. And so in that work with students, I was sitting with students all day and every day. And I'm sure, as you all know, one of the biggest things that our students complain about when they talk about DEI are the microaggressions and the invalidations that they experience by like faculty and staff in and outside the classroom, right? Like the peer situation, they are capable of handling, like if it's a peer, but like when there's that power dynamic, a lot of our students feel powerless. They feel hopeless, right? They feel defeated and they don't know what to do. So that was a topic of discussion that came up a lot when I was working in a cross-cultural center. And so I decided to pick up a job where I worked with faculty and staff. So at Cal State Fullerton, I started working as like the learning, like a trainer. Like I essentially was our DEI trainer. I developed curriculum on different types of DEI topics. And I trained specifically faculty and staff on campus on how to be more equity minded, what it means, what diversity, inclusion, equity means to you, what it means to us. How do you enact equity minded practices in your work inside and outside the classroom, right? So that's where my journey took me. And so I have since started the diversity, inclusion, equity training stuff, then programming, like dialogues, racial healing circles, like all that fun stuff are things that I've been doing on campus. And about 6 months ago, our previous senior diversity officer left for another opportunity. And this is the part where I tell you every day you're interviewing for a job, whether you know it or not. I was offered the interim position. And so that's how I became our assistant vice president, being here at Cal State Fullerton for about 4-ish years, right? So like if you remember, like the time frame hasn't been like super long. Like I graduated with my grad program in 2015. It's 2022. So in 7 years' time, I've been able to accomplish quite a bit. Like Luis just mentioned, I finished my doctorate at Cal State Fullerton, and the moment I finished it, was the moment Cal State Fullerton offered me this promotion. Like I just did my defense and they were like, yay, you pass. And then the VP of HRDI calls me and goes, hey, do you want to step into this role? Right? Like, so when they tell you that like some like higher education, like there's some merit if you want to work in higher education and getting a doctorate, regardless of what you get your doctorate in, whether you take a PhD or EDD route, like that happened for me. Like, and I recognized 3 years ago when I started the program that if I wish to continue in this career trajectory and move up and advance, then I'm going to need a doctorate. And so I took the time to do that, right? And it was very rewarding for me, right? I know for a fact that that's not everybody's story, right? But for me, I can say that it was very rewarding, and it was, for me, it was instant that I was able to get that position afterwards. So my work in DEI started off as it really started when I was like a high school teacher, right? Like I had students come in and they had basic needs issues, right? They couldn't come to school because they didn't have a jacket because it was too cold. They didn't know when food would be on the table. They had to stay behind to watch their siblings, right? To doing like what most folks think about social justice advocacy work. Like I worked in an LGBT resource center, cultural identity center. And then I moved into training and development. And now my role is really more about like strategy. I think of more like my job is more of like a strategist than I do as like a diversity practitioner than I do as like a trainer or developer now, because a lot of the work that I do now is how do I bring, so Cal State Fullerton is is the largest CSU in the system. We have about 40,000 students and like 5,000 employees. So how do I come up with creative and innovative ways to bring 45,000 people on this journey with me every day to think about how can we be more inclusive? How can we practice more equity mindedness in our work, in our roles, in our interactions with each other? How do I empower people to do that? Right. And my job, my role here on campus is to lay a vision on the how and then lead folks into doing the what. Right. Which is different because just 6 months ago, I was the one doing the what. Right. And so there's many ways I think that like higher education takes on some of this like the DEI work, right? And so when I think about diversity, inclusion, equity work, I think there are many ways to go about it. So I want us to kind of like do this quick exercise. Go on like higheredjobs.com or chronicles.com and look at jobs. Go to Google, all right? And just look up DEI jobs in higher ed. And like, just let folks know what you find. You can put it in the chat or say it out loud if you want to. What are some things that pop up when you put in DEI jobs in higher ed? If you go to like higheredjobs.com, they have a whole category for it. It's diversity and multicultural affairs. So just scroll through some of those and like, tell me, what do you see? What do you find? We can do this together.
DEI program coordinator, emergency hire, men and masculinity coordinator, diversity and inclusion, assistant director of international student programs. Raleigh, North Carolina.
Apply. But okay, so that's a good example. So like we're naming off so many different things, right? We had a male success initiatives coordinator, DEI OED manager, I see it in the chat. Like there are a lot of different jobs that you'll find in higher education if you just look up like DEI jobs. So this is the website, higher ed jobs. So there are many places to look for higher ed jobs. The Chronicle is another option. So if you click the job search, all of these are considered administrative. And you click on they're categorized. So diversity and multicultural affairs, you'll see they told you there's currently 417 job postings related to DEI work in our country. Right? So you can refine it. If you're like, oh, you know what? I really want to work at a 4-year institution. There are 380 jobs. Right? Full-time jobs, part-time jobs. We can drill it down by state. California usually has the most because we have the most universities, right? So just in the state of California, we're looking at 45 options, right? Emergency hire for men, right? Recruitment, diversity recruitment program manager, an AVP for diversity, inclusion, equity, right? Their Title IX officers are considered DEI work. Compliance investigator, they're assistant deans in wellness and inclusion, biological services director of diversity initiatives. So STEM related DEI work. So there are a lot of different ways that I think we can think about, what do DEI jobs look like in higher education? Right? Just this website alone, we've already seen like this one, strategy, inclusive practices. Like what even does that mean? But it's there. Okay. All right. UC Berkeley, your fanciness. But there's so many options I think that exist. So when I think about kind of like what jobs are out there, this is kind of like what I see, right? In terms of like different DEI jobs. There are people who do cultural and identity work. Right. So that's where I started. I was a queer resource center, like coordinator, right? But this also goes with like race and ethnicity. So our Latinx student resource centers, our Black African American student resource centers, even our Undocu Ally, like undocumented student centers, like all of those are considered cultural and identity centers. And like first generation peer mentorship programs, TRIO programs, like all of those kind of fall under that category of like cultural identity based programs. In community colleges, we're talking about our Puente programs or Moja programs, like all of those. Then there's like the learning and development route. There are a lot of folks that go into DEI work through training, And I did that too. I got my start working in cultural identity centers, specifically doing safe space training. Safe zone training was like my jam. I had like a 4-hour training that I did so often when I was in like grad programs in my first couple of years of working. Like I memorized all 47 slides in order. Like I knew exactly what slide came next and what was on every slide because I delivered it so often to different, like to students, to faculty, to cabinet, athletics. And then when I was working in a nonprofit, I delivered it to like businesses, like the hospital, like high school teachers, like all of it. So I started off with cultural identity and like learning and development, right? But there's also compliance jobs. So like when we were just reading through that Title IX is considered, right, a DEI work, and it's under compliance. There's also another job about like investigations, right? That's considered compliance work. So our campus has one too. I'm actually hiring a DHR administrator, discrimination, harassment, retaliation, right? And these are the folks that like do the compliance piece of what I'm trying to accomplish in the more, so I see it as more like I do proactive and preventative care. But when something does happen, we need like a process to address those. That's what compliance work is, right? It's more reactive in nature. They don't do anything until someone submits a report, and it's off of like protected statuses, Title IX, right? Equal opportunity, like all of those things fall under compliance work. And then of course there's faculty. You can always get into DEI work through teaching. Right. And not just like teaching a DEI course or whatever, but thinking about doing service, doing different administrative work. How do you decolonize a syllabus, right? We have a lot of faculty on our campus in Cal State Fullerton that will, it's actually a training that our Faculty Development Center offers. And then we have faculty that go and they'll work together and decolonize their syllabus, right? Like how do we think through a more inclusive lens in textbooks that we're reading, in not just what we're teaching, but how we're teaching it, right? Like inclusive pedagogy, all of that stuff. So faculty also come up the ranks and take in a lot of DEI jobs, either as part of their teaching or move into administrator roles from being faculty into kind of like a more like senior level administrator as it relates to DEI work. Right. So just like we just went through one website, there are like 15,000 websites. You can do this on Google. You can do this on Indeed.com if you want. Right. And if you look up diversity, inclusion, equity jobs and drill down to like location or even like positions, institutions that you want to work with and work for. Right. Luis is he works in a DEI job. He had mentioned that he's the director of our Title V grant. Right? Title V grant is about like compliance. So he works technically he works in a DEI job, right? So how do we think through, right? Like there are DEI jobs everywhere as part of like entry, right? Like it's not uncommon, I think, to do every job, I think, in higher ed through a DEI lens, but there are definitely specific DEI work within higher education that, like, I think the folks here tonight are the people that usually go into some sort of DEI work, our counseling, our social worker, anthropology, higher ed folks, right? Like these are the people that usually enter the field through a cultural identity center, a learning development lens. And some folks do it through compliance, like even like student affairs, student conduct, bias response, right? Like all of those things fall under like DEI work and how that connects to the system of higher education. What else is on this PowerPoint? I had some tips. That's what I did. I wrote down some tips. If you're interested in doing diversity, inclusion, equity work, I recommend starting by knowing yourself. All right, your own history, your own journey, why this is important to you. What are you about? Right. And the reason why is because when you get into the trenches of doing like DEI work, it's personal work. It's hard work. Right. Nobody goes into DEI work because they personally have never had an experience with sexism, with racism, right, with homophobia, with transphobia. Right. Like most people who go into doing this work are folks who actively have been victims of systemic interpersonal oppression, right? So I highly recommend folks who wish to get into this work to do the self work, right? Like you need to be in a place where when somebody is in front of you telling you things like, I don't know why safe zone training is important. It's a sin in the eyes of God, right? And they're saying this to you in the training. You need to be able to not be triggered in that moment and facilitate that dialogue, right? When things get heated and you're sitting down and there are a group of people telling you that DEI work is useless. I don't know why we spend money on this on our campus. We should spend this on paying faculty more. You need to be able to not be triggered and have conversations with people about why this work is important and pull them along with you and not create more resistance. And in order to do that, you have to know yourself. You have to know what your triggers are. You need to know your own journey and identify the points that connect you to this work, but also the points that you need to distance from doing this work so that you can keep your sanity and you can find balance in your life, right? Which then helps you like figure out, what are you about? Like, why do you want to do this? What is your interest in doing DEI work? Do you like it from a lens of compliance? Like, does that bring you joy? As Marie Kondo says, like when you pick up, right, a compliance report, you go, right? Or do you get your fulfillment or satisfaction from sitting around with students and being a part of their journey, right? And you see them grow and develop and like they put the pieces together as their identity develops in those 4 to 6 years that they're there, like you see their growth. And for you, when you see them grow, you're like, ooh, that brings me joy. That makes this worthwhile, right? Like you need to know what you're about. For me, it was all about education. I love teaching people anything. It could be about anything. I love teaching people and I love being able to have conversation and dialogue to help people learn more about themselves. So that's the lens that I approach DEI work. I do it from a very interpersonal, right, starting point and help them connect it to the system, right? How do your individual experiences and your intersecting identities impact the way that you move around the world? And how does it then impact the way that the world moves around you? And so remember, we started this with, I too was a master's of counseling student. So I like to think that I do DEI work from a CBT like perspective, like it's cognitive behavioral, like your thoughts affect your behaviors. So if I can get people to pause and think about their thoughts, right, then I am more likely to impact their behavior. So I'm not here to talk about someone's racist behaviors. I'm here to get them to acknowledge racist thoughts and normalize it, like help them understand that it's been socialized, right? And then give them the tools and empower them to create change within themselves. Because I can write a bomb-ass policy that I think is anti-racist. But if I give this policy to someone who is racist to enact it, it's still going to be oppressive. Right? And so how do I help individuals do that work? So that's what I'm about. I had to learn that for myself, right? So, and then you identify a starting point. Like, where do you want to start? There's no wrong place to start. I started as a graduate assistant for a Cure Resource Center. That's where I got my start. It was my jam at the time. It brought me joy. I enjoyed it. It was part of my own growing, like learning about myself journey, right? And I made that intentional shift of coming out of like doing mental health counseling work and moving into like a higher education work. But my skill sets were transferable. I still use the same skills that I picked up from that counseling program many years ago. Right. And so that's how I knew it was fitting in my journey. Right. My starting point worked for me. And then I was open to opportunities that came along. Like I told you, I gave myself 6 months to find a job in higher ed. If I didn't, I would have probably gone and become like a high school counselor or something. I think I would have made an excellent high school counselor. Be open to different opportunities that came your way. And this is the part that it connects back to like knowing yourself. Because if you know what you're about, then you know what opportunities you want to take. Right? Like I started off as a residential life coordinator, moved into the director of ODI, doing like multicultural, cross-cultural center work. And then I worked with faculty and staff. And now I serve as our senior diversity officer. But through all of those jobs, I knew that my jam was educating people. I knew that like education provided social mobility, but it was also ingrained in a very racist system. So like, how do I take advantage of my roles, my positions to keep doing the work that I love to do, which is educate people, raise awareness, give them, empower them, give them the tools to enact the world that they wish to see. Right? How do I empower them to do that? How do I give them the tools to do that? So I still do it from a lens of education. And then the last piece is DEI work is about people and it's about strategy. You can't like be a successful DEI practitioner sitting by yourself. Like, you're not going to get very far. Like writing that policy by yourself, doing your training for yourself, like all of those things won't like, you're not going to see the fruition. So like, if you're looking to do DEI work, yeah, learn a niche, right? Get something in like I started, like I said, safe zone training, my jam, right? What is it that you want to be about? Where do you want to get started? And then from there, grow your portfolio, right? But find that common theme for yourself. Like, what is it that you're about? And at the core, remember that this work is about people, whether you're doing it for yourself, doing it for your peers, doing it for younger you, right? Whatever the case may be, like my why has changed over the years, right? Like for me, it was like, oh, I didn't know this was like a thing, to like, oh yeah, now that I've had the language for it, that was very homophobic. That was racist, right? Like, whew. And then now, like my wife and I have a kid. She's 16 months, right? She is a biracial, like interfaith, like has two moms. Like she has a lot of different identities that when she goes into school, she is relying on other people to not be stupid. Right? Like not the people are not going to say stupid things to her in the classroom, or teachers aren't going to say silly things to her like, where's your dad for Father's Day dance? You know, like things like that, right? Like I'm relying on society to not do that to my child. And so for me, my why has changed. Like, how do I educate people now so that when she goes to school, she's less likely to encounter those things? Not that she won't, but less likely. Or people have the language to talk to my daughter about the two moms that she has at home, about the fact that she celebrates Christmas because we celebrate Hanukkah and Christmas every year in December, right? Because my wife is Jewish, like normalizing some of that for her. So when she goes to school and she encounters people, like it's not as big of a mystery, where people will say things and inadvertently make her feel othered, because of identities and family systems that she belong in. So it's about people and it's about strategy, right? Like you can't just like go in there and say, we're going to make this change. Because if that was the case, racism would have ended a long time ago. If I can just go into a classroom and be like, all right, I need you to stop being racist. Okay, thanks, bye. And then I walk out and that's it, done, we move on, I would be out of a job by like next week. But that's not the case, right? That's not how we do it. That's not how this works. So you have to be strategic. You have to know, what I tell people is, you have to know how to pick your battles so that you can win the war. Sounds really aggressive, but you have to be able to strategize in that way and figure out, oh, this is not a fight that I'm willing to fight today so that I can win another fight tomorrow. Mm-hmm. So I think those are the things that I kind of jotted down a little bit. Luis also wanted me to take questions, but he also wanted me to give you all an eval. Hold on, let me do that before I forget, because Luis will be very mad. Let me drop that in the chat. But I think I said a lot of stuff. Do you all have any questions? Do you all have any thing about anything that I just talked about, or even just like tips and tricks or things that you're going through that you're like, oh, see, so I think I would really like more information about X.
Quick question. Yeah, my question basically is, coming from the background of being a recruiter professionally and a cultural anthropology grad student, I'm wondering what might be an entry point for me into DEI, because I'm interested in transitioning into this work, but not having any job experience in academia. but having recruiting experience, which seems like it might be somewhat relevant. I was just kind of wondering, someone from that background, what you might recommend in terms of the kind of roles I should be maybe focusing in on. That makes sense.
No, that's a good question, Alex. Alex, right?
Yes.
Yeah. So I have seen DEI works that are connected to recruitment work, right? Like we have so many institutions across the country that are like, oh, we want to mirror our student demographics to the community demographics. And so they'll intentionally recruit like based off of race, based off of gender and things like that. So recruitment has its own like DEI like niche. But if you're looking for like other work outside, I would think about what your transferable skills are from your current job. Do you do programming? Do you do learning and development? Right? Do you do report writing? Do you do any investigations? Like any of those things would be a great thing to consider. And then look for jobs that have those things in the job description. Like, especially, I will tell you, I think housing is a great entry point because they have a high turnover rate. A lot of housing jobs, they keep their coordinators for 2 to 3 years. 3-ish years, and some housing positions, even written in the contract, states that an entry-level coordinator can only be there, or a coordinator position can only be there for 4 years, and then you're out. Like you have to be out. Right? So like that's also a good way to start because housing does everything, like I said earlier. But if you want to grow your portfolio in doing DEI work, I would encourage you to consider like a housing job or working for a cultural identity center. Those positions are also high in turnover because you serve a lot of students and it's very high, like high intensity, high touch all the time. But also like academic advising also might be a good one, but through like a DEI like lens, so like a TRIO program, EOPS, right, equal opportunity like programs and things like that. I think all of those options, Alex, might be good for you to explore.
Thank you so much. That was really helpful.
No problem. Maricruz, I have been receiving your emails. I'm sorry that I'm a jerk and I have not responded.
You know, I wasn't going to bring it up, but I'm glad you did. But with that said, I just really want to thank you and your department for all the amazing work you do at Cal State Fullerton. I really enjoy the Titan Table Talks. And so I just really wanted to start off by thanking you for that really awesome work. But with that said, I think everybody who gets into DEI work has a really unique journey. I'm personally really interested in hearing a little bit about what it was like to graduate. You were in a role for 1 year and 3 months, and then you were a director. What was that transition like? Because it was rather fast.
It was hard, but like I worked at a small private liberal arts college though. So like everything, like you were everything to everyone all the time. I think the I think the gap in knowledge that I had to figure out was it was never the work itself, but let me tell you, after you move beyond like an assistant director and you move into like management position, the hardest thing is managing people, not leading people, managing people, supervising people. Like that was the skill that I think I had to learn. How do you find that perfect Venn diagram middle of being a good manager, a good leader, and a good supervisor? Like, how do you lead folks, give them a vision and motivate and empower them to hit this goal together? How do you manage them and make sure that we're all moving along? And how do you supervise them? How do you hold them accountable, right? To the everyday work, to like their goals and our services and things like that. I think that's what I struggled with the most, is making that transition between like being a coordinator, someone who is constantly being supervised, right? To being a director, and now you're the one who's supervising people and leading people and managing the work, the office, the students, and everything.
Definitely makes sense. Thank you for sharing.
Mm-hmm.
I actually have a quick question that's maybe more of, if you could maybe talk a little bit about, like I hear about DEI work being very intense, kind of like what you were saying earlier, it's high touch, high involvement. And I could imagine that getting very stressful and exhausting work sometimes. I'm kind of curious, like, what you do to stay sane and like sustain yourself through all of that work, because I could imagine that it can be easy to burn out quickly.
I wish that I can tell you that I like, oh, I'm so good at like self-care and work-life balance. I'm not. I'm really crappy at it. I'm not. So I'll tell you what a mentor of mine told me many years ago, that the quest for balance is impossible. That we just tell people that, oh, you have to live a balanced life, but like, it's impossible in the world that we live in, especially in the past couple of years when like, literally, I think from 2020 to like right now, we're on the cusp of 2023. It's just been like back-to-back bullshit, right? Like you can't stop it and it's beyond your control. And you're kind of just there managing like all this stuff all the time. So she told me that balance is like a fairy tale. It's something that we all love to talk about, but we can never have it. So what I strive for is harmony. Right. And like and how I conceptualize that is like in one day, I'll never find a balance of being able to play all the roles that I have in my life, being a senior diversity officer, but also like being a manager, being a supervisor, being a leader, being a friend, being a wife, being a mother, being a child. Right. Like I have different things that exist beyond work. And so my quest hasn't always been about finding balance between those things, because balance implies equality, right? Constantly. And like, there's just not enough hours in the day. I just don't have enough energy in any given time frame to equally be all those things all the time. So I strive for harmony, right? Like maybe today, like I am I excel at being a senior diversity officer and I don't see my kid tonight, right? But tomorrow, right? Like I plan my life where I am very structured in where I spend my time. And when I am spending time there, I'm present. So it's not about quantity, it's about quality, right? Finding that harmony of being present and carving time to do things for others and doing things for myself and being able to do this work at home. So I try to go swim laps at the pool. I spend time with my kid. We have 2 cats at home, right? Like I do a lot of things. My mom is here with us. Like the holiday seasons are here. Like there's a lot of different things. And sometimes I do stupid shit too. Like I plug in my Super Nintendo and I'll play with it for a couple of hours and nobody's going to stop me. You know, like it's about finding harmony, right? Like things that bring you joy. Like when you pick it up and you're like, yes, like I watched the shit out of the Elton John live special on Disney Plus. All right. I regret not going. So like it's finding balance. It's balance within all the things, but the achievement here is how do you find harmony? Right? Like, how do you balance out your time in a way that like, maybe I can't do this thing today, but how can I plan my day now so I can be present for this thing tomorrow?
I love that answer. Thank you so much.
Yeah. It wasn't my answer. Like I said, it was a mentor.
Still really good. Spanish graduate student. What can I do to become a good candidate for a job in DI as opposed to someone who studied higher ed or counseling? Is there something else beyond my... Oh, that's a good question. So I actually think that there is an entry point for you, Alexandra, where like the study, and I'm going to assume that you are saying that you're getting your master's in Spanish, right? Is that true? I just want to confirm before I like.
Yes.
Okay, cool.
Yeah, am I?
Yeah. So if there's, I think, a bunch of different roles that, like I think a cultural identity center is a good place to start, right? Like a Latinx cultural identity center, because language encompasses a lot of culture, right? Like how do you sell yourself in a way to help people understand that you're learning language, and in it, you're learning the culture and the history of peoples. right? So there's a lot of cultural identity work within like just language and like any language studies. But the other thing I would recommend you do, especially if you're a graduate student, is think of ways to land like a graduate assistantship while you're in your grad program that will pick up supplemental experience for you, right? That helps you transform like your degree into something actionable. So
Yeah.
like a graduate assistant in like service learning, student organization, like any of those things, I think will help build a more robust portfolio, especially if you're looking to like do like a DEI program thing, right? Like I really would, number one, think of ways that you can teach people how your degree in Spanish, right, in Spanish studies is DEI work, and how culture is connected through language, right, and how that plays a part and a role in, and what things you have done, right, in your grad program to make that come alive for people. Right. And then like a graduate assistantship and things like that can make those connections for folks. I think it starts there. It's the answer in conclusion is, how well can you sell yourself within what you are learning in your studies and connect it to experiences, be it programming, because that's like a general skill that everybody would like anybody to have. How do you do programming? How do you do learning and development? Like those are two very hot button topic skills. Like if you can get in front of a crowd and teach people something, or if you can like plan a bomb ass program, like those two skill sets combined with your degree, I think will make you a very, like I would hire you.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Awesome. So I have a question. I know you said that DEI work encompasses two major components, people and strategy.
Mm-hmm.
And that's very much a common trend that I've heard from other DEI practitioners. I'm wondering if you can elaborate a little bit on what an effective strategy looks like, and what components do you take into consideration when creating a strategy?
Yes. So I think strategy as a noun could mean a lot of different things, right? It could be like an action plan, which is how most folks think about it. But I think when we think about DEI work and strategy, we should think about it as an adjective, an action, and then a noun, like a verb, a noun, and an adjective. Like, so how do you be strategic? How do you create a strategic plan? Right? And then how do you leverage strategy as an action, right? To get folks moving. So I think I can give you a relevant example. So I am right now trying to get off the ground our next campus climate survey. Right? So for folks who don't know, a campus climate survey is a tool used by many institutions to gauge the culture and climate of inclusion and sense of belonging for faculty, staff, and students. There are many groups across the country that deliver this tool, right? And so when I started in this position, they're like, all right, so you're in charge of rolling out our campus climate survey, right? So that's a good strategy, roll out our campus climate survey. So what I did was I took it and I was more strategic. So instead of just saying we're doing a campus climate survey, I'm selling it to our campus as a campus climate survey to develop our campus's first DEI strategic plan. And that changes the focus a little bit. So that's strategy at work. So that's strategic, right? Like, how do you take something that seems kind of like boring and stagnant, right? Like a survey, and turn it into something that's dynamic, something that the campus wants and needs, but also gives you leverage in doing DEI work in the future. You're collecting baseline data. You're getting information from faculty, staff, and students about their experiences. So you can now do DEI work from an informed position of data and stories that's been collected through the survey. And you're creating a strategic plan that, like, for the next 4 years, whenever somebody comes and says, hey, Cecil, I want to do DEI work in my department, my response to them is going to be, have you looked at our DEI strategic plan? right? And then encourage them to identify, right, goals and strategies that they can use within like their department, within their division, within their college, that now something that seems so easy to begin with, hey, Cecil, roll out this campus climate survey, is now going to be used as an anchor and a guiding like document for how we do DEI work at Cal State Fullerton for the next 4 years. So that, I think, is a good example of how you take something like the word strategy and use it as a noun, as an adjective, and as a verb.